Y'all, happy Friday. Um, man, I just didn't get the video done yesterday. I wish that I would have. As you can see, I'm in here in the fellowship hall. We're getting ready to feed lunch to all the roofers that have been fixing our roof, which with all the rain this week has been a disaster, as you can imagine. But anyway, so I spent all day yesterday doing brisket and stuff and just didn't get the video done. So anyway, here I am, and we've got a great lesson this week. So let's just jump right into that. We're talking about Ezekiel in the Valley of the Dry Bones. Both of the options they give you to start off are pretty good, but let me just encourage you, because we didn't have connection groups last week, spend some time just catching up with your kids. See how their Easter went, what's been going on, that kind of thing. And that's just good to do anyway, but certainly after we haven't met for a couple of weeks. So if you want to skip the options and do some talking and praying and then jump at a lesson, I think that's a great plan. As far as Ezekiel goes, this is literally the only chapter of the book that we're going to look at, which is pretty stunning. But this is probably the most important chapter because you get a picture of God's justice and you get a picture of God's grace all in one swoop, which is really, really important. So the children of Israel are being taken to Babylon in captivity, and this was for a number of reasons: for their idolatry, for their unwillingness to acknowledge and honor the Sabbath. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but God means it when He tells us to not sin and to not frequently sin. That's always going to cost us, and that's what the Israelites experienced. That's what we experience from time to time too. That's why this lesson is still so applicable. But here's what's cool. I'm going to say this up front, but you might mention it to him at the end or wherever you want to. But it's helpful to remember that Ezekiel and the book of Daniel are happening simultaneously. Now, Ezekiel begins before Daniel's story begins. Daniel, of course, it starts off with him being taken into captivity. But it's the same story. We're just seeing the story from different angles. Ezekiel is going to Babylon as a captive, but he doesn't get a government job like Daniel does. And so the point is that God is working from different directions. And we'll come back to that in a minute, but kind of keep that in mind as you go through. The captivity is going to be 70 years, by the way. And this particular story is 5 years into the captivity. So that's, again, just you might tell the students that. That might be helpful information, but it's good for you to keep in mind too. So 5 years into their 70 years of punishment, God takes Ezekiel and gives him a vision. And you kind of get the impression that it's a vision, but the Lord sort of picks him up and takes him. I don't know if he physically took him somewhere, but this is something that Ezekiel is seeing. And here's why that's a big deal. There's no zombies in this situation. And I promise some students Sunday morning just go, zombies, right? Like that's going to pop up. Where are these people that God took their bones and turned them back into human beings? It's just a vision in this particular case, because God was trying to teach Ezekiel something that he was going to let the rest of the people know. But in this particular instance, God has raised people from the dead. In this particular instance, that did not happen. This is just a vision. There are no zombies. So again, there will be some probably middle school boy, but maybe a high school girl that's going to ask about zombies, and there's no zombies this time. Okay. The other thing I want to point out too, and I think is important, is change takes time. As you read through Ezekiel prophesying over these bones, he's preaching to these bones, declaring God's grace and forgiveness, which is an awesome thing. And you hear about the bones rattling, and then you see the sinews coming back onto the bones, and it's kind of it's an interesting scene. It's kind of a gross scene too. But here's what I want you to catch: like, it wasn't just Ezekiel started preaching, like just bam, it happened. There was a process in place. And I'm sort of preaching to myself here, and I'm preaching to you guys too when I say that the process that we are involved in as leaders of students, or just leaders of people, period, whether it's your own kids or my kids or our students or your coworkers, as we are declaring the truth to them, change takes time. And it's not always like they hear the gospel and just get saved immediately. And even after they get saved, they're different, but it takes time. It's a process that God goes through, and honestly, and I suspect most of you could attest to that's not a bad thing, because God just graciously over and over shows His grace and keeps changing us and doesn't ever let us go, and it's a really cool process. But you might point that out to them, that grace and change, sanctification is the big fancy word for it, resurrection is the other one we see here. It takes time, and that's an okay thing. The other thing I want you to see too, and just really kind of last two or three final thoughts, grace has unlimited power. There is no one that is unreachable by God's grace, even people that are dead. I'm not talking physical death, I mean spiritually dead. And that's actually true. All of us were spiritually dead before we came to know Christ. But there's nobody that's so nasty, filthy, grossly sinful that God can't reach at all. And there's nobody and no position on earth that God can't reach. His grace is unlimited in its reach and its power, which is so important to remember. The other thing I would say too is there's no situation that God can't restore. When you think about what it must have been like to be in captivity, and yet God fixed it. It didn't last a day longer than he said it was going to last, but even those people that were in captivity, God continued to love them, and he restored them, and he brought them back, and he did exactly what he said he's going to do. There's nobody that he can't reach. It's an amazing thing. Last thing I will say is this, again, think about Daniel, and this is happening same time as Ezekiel. Ezekiel's out preaching to people, hey, like God's going to rescue us. God's going to save us. And at the same time, this is really, really cool. At the same time, God has Daniel in a position with the king of Babylon, the one who started this whole mess. And God has strategically placed Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and all those guys in the court of the king. And he is influencing the king, who eventually Daniel and others will have a part in having the children of Israel set free. The Lord keeps his promises, and even while he's making promises to us, he's already working to bring those promises about. Just something to be encouraged by. Guys, I love y'all. Again, sorry I didn't get to you later. We'll see you.